Well, it's Italki,
Yes.
who used to be a Messianic rabbi. Tell me, how did you go from what you were doing before, I understand in Canada,
Yeah.
and now you're here in South Florida. Tell me, what was the transition that took place?
Okay, so the transition was I became associated, I would say, with the Messianic movement. Though I myself did not hold to any core Messianic concepts or doctrines which are fundamentally Christian within nature. So I ended up in Canada through an associate who knew another individual who was overseeing a congregation, who needed help, who needed an assistant, and eventually was looking to leave. And so I found myself in a situation which I know probably is relatively unorthodox in the sense of anyone being involved with the Messianic movement.
Right.
In other words, why bother with it? However, in my situation, I'm a little bit optimistic in trying to reach people. And my views on Jesus and the New Testament are considered very unorthodox and very controversial to the Messianic world. And so essentially I ended up there and worked for close to 10 years leading a congregation in Toronto. And eventually the goal of that was to help introduce the Jews who were there to a proper understanding of the Torah, and also to help them question the narrative of Christianity. That was the goal. By doing that, it would have to be done in a format which would be feasible to relate to them where they're at, right?
Right.
Reach them where they're at. And most Jews, for the most part, in Messianic Judaism, come from non-observant backgrounds. That's just a fact. And if they do claim they're Orthodox, it's nominal, which means that their family only attended an Orthodox shul, but never were Orthodox observant within that nature. So, nonetheless, many of them became secular, eventually through some type of spiritual thing they had some encounter with God through a church or some Christian friend, and ended up to a denomination in Christianity we call Messianic Judaism. So I reached out to these individuals, at the same time finding a need to reach out to the non-Jews. Many non-Jews in the mid-90s started to come to an awareness of the Messianic movement, trying to find their either Jewish or Hebrew roots. And within that, there's a whole mishingas, or I would say a bowl of challah, if you will, a mixture of different ideologies and philosophies, dogmas and doctrines of people trying to find themselves. However, one of the things I found at the core is that individuals want to be able to learn what is the actual truth, not just the Torah, but eventually of their belief system. What does the New Testament really say? What does it not say? And so I've dedicated my time to reach out to many of these non-Jews to help introduce them to courses dealing with the origins of Avraham Avinu, dedicating classes on this. In other words, what does Chazal say, the Midrash say, various rabbinical sources to help them understand the path of what we would call a ger, essentially, one who would walk in the footsteps of Abraham.
Right.
So eventually I was able to help counsel a decent amount. I don't know numbers offhand, I haven't kept the count, but I was able to at least help counsel families and individuals to convert to Judaism, to deny anything Messianic in nature. And what people came to understand is that the denial of what they would believe is Jesus is denying the system of Christianity, its doctrines and theologies, even if it's spread with the Hebrew Jewishness on top of it, right?
Right.
And understand, to be able to question things and understand things. And one of the things I found with the non-Jews is that many of them will wake up one day and say, okay, well, Jesus kept Sabbath, Jesus kept this, Jesus was a Jew. Okay, great. But the challenge to them was, if your Christianity was so wrong about the Old Testament on things like the Sabbath, then how much more is your Christianity wrong about the New Testament? Which means, don't just question the church on the Sabbath, but question them on things like the Trinity, question them on things like the Incarnation, and even the Davidic role that Jesus was supposed to fulfill, which he did not fulfill, to be a Mashiach ben David candidate. He did not fill that. The New Testament, in my opinion, did not teach that. And so basically, as more of these individuals begin to question and learn, it was easy for their conscientiously to be able to let go of their Christianity.
So let me ask you, because I understand you basically were in charge of a very large Messianic congregation.
Correct.
And when you came and said, I don't hold to these principles that the Messianics do, what type of reaction did the congregants, the leaders within that community have towards you?
So a lot of people already had the belief, a predisposition towards me, because I was already more pro-rabbinic in nature. I upheld the words of Chazal, the halakha. These are things that I personally kept within my family. And because the former leader wanted something more traditional, though I believe it was also to be able to try to be a witness to the Jewish community, he also understood that this would create a problem. So upon my arrival to Canada, there was a large lashback, right? People left in droves.
Right.
But eventually, as I settled in, people also understood they had to make a decision. So people started to see the dividing line without being very controversial, without being condescending in public, without abusing the bima, right, as a position on that. People would be able to read between the lines. Okay, this is not for me. I don't want nothing Jewish. I'm leaving.
Right.
Where those who would embrace it, they would come, they would learn, and also recognizing my stay there was only going to be short. Obviously, it's not going to be there forever, because when you create the need to understand the traditional Jewish environment, the need of a Messianic congregation is no longer needed.
What does that turn into then?
Well, eventually it should turn into a normal Jewish community, something if underneath the guidance of kosher supervision, in my opinion, and that means it should be aligned with the Jewish community in that sense. Okay, so it dismisses the need for having something. Now, if the individuals refuse that, then it clearly remains something which I would consider more of a church.
Right.
Obviously, right? Because they're, for the most part, the majority of Messianics are not keeping what you would understand as a normal, traditional Jewish lifestyle.
Now, I have found that many people who, like yourself, have come out of the Messianic world, or the Hebrew roots world,
Right.
whatever you want to call it, they've had problems being able to face the Jewish community and the Jewish community trusting those individuals
Right.
as being legit, in other words, being honest in their shuvah, or they're leaving completely that world. And this happens also with a lot of Christian ministers, that basically when they convert, they also run into trouble
Right.
by the Jewish community accepting them as legit and honest, true returnees, or true, people who have converted to Judaism. How would you address that? Because I know you're now new here in South Florida, because you obviously embrace completely Judaism, rabbinical Judaism, that's what you just mentioned to me.
Right.
How do you embrace, or how do you tell people, it's going to be a hard road for you to come into the Jewish community? Is it or is it not? I mean, has that been your experience?
The expression, two Jews, three opinions. And every Jew has a right to reserve and question the legitimacy and sincerity of someone to determine their motives. And I do understand that comes with the path. However, my role, even if someone asks me, my viewpoint on Jesus' New Testament, is still what I always believe it is, and that is to be able to teach the historical nature of what it is, which is questioning the narrative for the non-Jewish people. So that gives them, even for Jews who are so-called in that system, they have to have an understanding what is the historical narrative behind these, not the dogmas that are created by the Christian church or individuals. To be able to break this down historically, and therefore I tend to pull from certain works that would cater in my favor. So you have the late works of Professor Dovid Flusser, who worked at Bar-Ilan University most of his life, dedicated. There is also Rabbi Eliyahu Soloveitchik. There's also the Yavet, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, right? There's also Gezer Vermes. Many of these individuals, by the way, which Vermes, or Gezer Vermes, he was also a Jew who became a Catholic and then renounced his Catholicism, returned back to Judaism, but still dedicated historical work on the New Testament to be able to break down these misnomers, theological notions that became what we know in the Christian Messianic movement. These, I feel, are credible sources to be able to reach most of the non-Jews and Jews who are involved in it, to have them come to understand the truth, to renounce the lie, and to be able to find themselves a part of the Jewish community if they so desire to join the Jews. Now, definitely if they're Jewish, they need to renounce that system and do a full shuvah and return back, which means now there's no more mistaken notion that Jesus is divine or he's God in the flesh. There's no trinities or anything else of that nature that was created by the church. Once these are broken down, it's no longer necessary to hold to them. I'm on record, for one, telling individuals Jews do not need a New Testament, period. They don't need a New Testament, nor do they need to believe in Jesus as a Mashiach figure. So,
very good point. Because a lot of the movements are now moving away from the idea of Jesus being divine, while other groups within Orthodoxy embrace the notion of, unfortunately, that Ein Sof in the form of a clothing, of human clothing. Yeah, I won't go who the movement is, but everybody knows. Right? Exactly, which is a big problem because it's repeating.
Yes, it's the same thing, and you bring up a good point, Rabbi Otero. That's another problem in the Messianic world I see. is taking Kabbalistic concepts literal, when first and foremost it's a hashkafa, which means an outlook. So therefore it's not a majority consensus on some things, even if there's a good majority of Jews who believe in the mystical. Not the entire Jewish world overholds these concepts. And even then, there's a diverse opinion in different halachic schools, whether one follows the Ramach or one follows the Arizal. But even in that, these views should never be taken literal, sadly, which are applied. Like even the concept of Simsun. I've heard a Messianic teaching. I even heard a Messianic rabbi try to tell me the Trinity is proven in the Zohar. Now this individual clearly doesn't speak Hebrew, read Hebrew, let alone the Aramaic in the Zohar. So how would he be able to claim that the Zohar teaches the Trinity when it doesn't? And that's a mistaken notion of understanding Sfirot, which I've studied the Ramchal for many years, so therefore I'm prone to understand the Kabbalah through his hashkafa. And even then I understand that through more of a psychological analysis of the soul, and it should never be taken literal. So in a sense, these individuals who teach like Atzmut and Aguf, while I understand what that means, the problem is the average individual that, let's say, hears this being taught, they don't know what it means. And they believe it literal, which constitutes avodah zarah at the end of the day, and therefore...
Repeat that part. It constitutes what?
Avodah zarah, idolatry.
So this is a big problem that we have in the world, and I'm going to say both Jewish and non-Jewish,
Yes.
is that through the misunderstanding of what we just said, idolatry has come and brought up its ugly head again.
Yes.
Okay? Because a lot of people don't understand those concepts. They take it literally.
Yes.
And therefore, it is now justified by many Messianics because they believe, well, this Hasidic Jewish group believes in that. We also believe in that.
Right, right.
So why do we have to reject that?
Right. It's almost like trying to give grounds to find support of something to justify one's belief. But the problem is with that, what it does is it exposes individuals' lack of sincere desire to know the text for itself. A perfect example. I had an individual try to speak to me about the death of a Sadiq, right? Like for Passover, when the Passover just came, there's the notion that Jesus is the Passover lamb. Clearly, I advocate that he's not, because in the original manuscripts of Greek, specifically in 1 Corinthians, it doesn't say that. Words were added to Paul's mouth. Besides that notion, the understanding that Jesus died as this individual to justify atonement of a death, even though Passover does not atone, right? We know that it's not. It's
right.
more of a Zevach Shalomim, a peace offering. But in this sense, an individual tried to deter to, let's say, Masechet Nedarim, where it talks about the death of the righteous atoning. But what these individuals don't realize is that the death of atonement of a Sadiq within itself came as a result after the Roman Empire tried to force the Jews to stop studying Torah and to venerate an emperor, which would be akin to man worship, God worship. So we have the death of the 10 righteous martyrs, Rabbi Akiva and all of the rabbis that died during that period. And so what most individuals don't understand, as the Ramchal brings on Derech Hashem, is that God will look at Israel as his servant. Isaiah 53, Israel is a servant. As God says in Parsha B'chukatai, Israel is a servant. And therefore, if amongst the collective whole Israel is not worthy, then you have the Nevi'im, the prophets. So we see Jeremiah, we see Ezekiel. They were forced to do certain acts which were a sign of what God was going to do to the nation, to concretize it. Now, in the event where you don't have Nevi'im, then you have Siddiqim, right? And so down towards that. But what most individuals don't realize, even at the end of the day, the death of a Siddiq is ultimately on behalf of the Jewish people. Right? And so we don't say that he's God in the flesh or anything. If he's emulating his Father in heaven, okay, the attributes of God, which should never also be taken literal for that matter, we still run into a problem with people distorting these rabbinical texts to find justification of what they believe in. And therefore it's a disservice to Chazal. It's really a disservice. You're taking something and you're copying it out of context, and you're really not studying it lishma, right, for its own sake. You're studying it for an agenda. That's a problem. To me, within itself, that automatically invalidates your point, because you're disingenuously using the text for another reason. Because you just want to use it for a theological proof text, and then you're off to the next soundbite. To me, it's not proper, and therefore it makes the whole thing invalid.
Now, I'm going to ask you another question that has to do with someone that is really strong within the Messianic world. And he's moving a lot of people, even colleagues of mine, rabbis of mine in Israel have spoken to him and everything else. And we know that he's a very passionate man.
Right.
He believes in whatever he believes. But have you had a chance to speak and address Rabbi SHAPIRA?
Me and Rabbi SHAPIRA, we have history, and we have indifferences. He knows where I stand, and I know where he stands on certain things. Our lack of working together was because we took two different directions. There was my direction, and also my viewpoint on certain things changed through time. A lot of things is that I've learned to bite my tongue on certain things publicly, and learn to refrain from speaking and speak when I have to speak. So in the situation where Rabbi SHAPIRA is at, there are certain things I don't agree with his outlook on certain things, and even though I know his intentions on certain things. So we've had private conversations before about certain concepts. And we talked about these things. It's been privately at his house, and I'm very grateful for those conversations that we had. And so what he's doing is he's convinced that he's playing a vital role in introducing the non-Jews to the Torah. I will say, even regardless of someone's disagreements with him, I still believe optimistically that it serves as a segue. It does serve as an opportunity for these non-Jews to enter in. However, how you introduce, I know Rabbi SHAPIRA, I believe in, he can correct me, but I do not believe he believes in the notion of conversion. He doesn't believe it's necessary, nor is it a requirement, because if you believe in the Messiah, there's no need to convert. The only problem I have with that is that it goes against the notion of what's brought down in the New Testament, where there is a differentiation between what we would call a Noahide, where Paul was entrusted to be able to teach these non-Jews. However, he was also open to the notion of conversion if one was to convert. And so if one was to convert, one needs to go to the proper Beit Din. You need to go to the authorities, which would be the Orthodox Jewish world. You have to go to the rabbis. And that's brought down a halakha. So I would say, in that regards, we have our indifferences. And regarding the divinity of Mashiach, I don't believe in the divine aspect of the Messiah, not in that sense of how he presents it. I have my own views, which I don't believe. Even with the Kabbalistic overtones, I don't take those as literal. Those are allegorical notions, metaphorical notions, which should not be translated into literal. And so even if one has a superior soul, if we were to argue in that Lashon, the thing is with that is that it still has to make sense on a literal level, right? It can't deviate from the Peshat. So we've had our conversations, and yes, there's differences, and we've agreed to disagree on certain things. That notion.
I've heard Rabbi SHAPIRA for many, many times. I've invited him to conversate or debate, like I did with Dr. Brown.
Okay.
I haven't heard any response from him.
Okay.
I noticed that Rabbi SHAPIRA is very weak in the New Testament.
Okay.
I have a degree in New Testament studies,
right,
in addition to the rabbinical side. So I've heard him, and as a matter of fact, I'm teaching in Spanish for the Spanish crowd a lot about the New Testament to the pastors and the Christians, to show them the errors that are in the actual text, manuscripts.
Okay.
And there's a lot. I'm not going to go into all of it. And I hear SHAPIRA repeating a lot of your basic evangelical messages. And he's now going to the Jewish community. We're talking about people who are Jewish, raised Jewish. We're not talking about the secular. We're not talking about people that have no connection to Judaism. We're talking about to religious Jews and starting to reach out to them, saying to the Israelis in particular, Jesus is the Messiah, is your Messiah. I had one guy who was in our community here in Hollywood say, I believe, because I heard Rabbi SHAPIRA, and I believe, and he's an Israeli who's been in the community for many years. And I said, can you actually believe this? How is it possible? You've been raised in the synagogue, you know what the concepts are of Mashiach. And there's no possible way he could be Mashiach. So how can you succumb just by hearing Rabbi SHAPIRA? And I heard Rabbi SHAPIRA. I took interest in hearing him. And most of the things he was saying from the New Testament perspective just didn't have any basis. I mean, I had problems with a lot of the Messianics as well. But, Yochanan de Punto Breslov, he mentioned, you have down there a guy who used to be a Messianic leader. I saw him in a picture. I go, okay, fine, I want to get to know him. Because I'm not one of these people who will judge a person for just someone says so-and-so and so-and-so. So he brought it to my attention. Then when a family member of mine says, oh, yeah, I know him, he's very, very well, good knowledge. That's why I wanted to do the interview with you, to set some records straight.
Yeah, so since you bring up the New Testament, it's a good point, and this is where an area where I found there's a lot of weak areas with the Messianics. For one, you probably know, the majority of the Messianic leadership, they lack fluency with the knowledge of Hebrew, let alone for Tanakh, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a major issue when it comes to certain things like Trinitarian beliefs. Like when the Torah begins to say, Bereshit bara Elohim, it doesn't say bara'u. It's right, not in the plural, it's bara, it's in singular, which automatically dismantles anything for a plurality of a Godhead in Trinity. And, it's the same thing with Hebrew grammar. But the same token is in the New Testament. One of the things I learned many, many years ago was looking at the Greek. Well, usually it's downplayed in anti-missionary circles what is called the Greek New Testament. We know Chazal mentions the Greek language as a beautiful language. There's also a notion when it was translated to the Septuagint, it was as grievous as the day of the Evel Zahav, the golden calf. And that's because how can you expect a non-Jew to comprehend whether these things are written when you can translate Hebrew in multiple ways? Thus we can look at the Aramaic Targums, right, for that notion. So besides that, the average leader in the Messianic movement does not have fluency in Greek. And so when I started to look at certain things in the Greek manuscripts and look at the older, and I made an attempt to learn the Koine Greek, which is a poor man's Greek, which is really comprised of Lower Greek and Aramaic. Mm-hmm. And I looked at certain things. This is where I started to see things that were later added to the manuscripts by the church scholars. Things that were not there. And there's earlier manuscripts, like, you're probably familiar with this since you mentioned you have a background in this, in Acts, when it talks about Jesus ascending. But there's a manuscript that says he didn't ascend.
No, exactly.
It didn't say he ascended. So you have...
It's even interesting because you mentioned that, because there's a part in there that even Bruce Metzger, an incredible scholar in the area of textual criticism, he says even the word in Greek in various different manuscripts for cloud, he was taken up in the cloud, doesn't exist there.
Right.
So you have a lot of things that were created. Now Shmuel HaKohen, who's writing right now, he asked, why do you call this guy SHAPIRA rabbi? Well, he's not a rabbi, but among the Messianics, he is considered a rabbi, and that's why, out of respect, I give him that. Because if you want to start a good conversation with someone, which hopefully one day we will be able to do that, SHAPIRA may have good intentions because he went through some type of a spiritual experience. He married this gal from Texas, I understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Him and his story goes way back as far as what I understand. I think in college, so, in that situation. But, I'm not, from what I understand with Rabbi Shapira's background, with how he got involved in the Messianic movement, I don't know everything with Dot, but he was affiliated with one of the organizations when I met him.
Right.
And his organization, they weren't too fond of me. And they also weren't too fond of him either. So, in fact, they put him on a blacklist. So, that's what I can say with that. So
he's too Israeli for the Messianic movement.
I think so, but also because his embrace of Chazal is also too extreme for them. That's the problem. They don't accept the writings of the Talmud. They think it's of the devil and many other things. So, in that sense, there's mutual agreement. An average Jew would find with Rabbi Shapira. The differences will come to the interpretation of certain things, right? That's where it's at. And when we come back to the New Testament thing, which is very important to bring up, one of the things I found with Messianics, whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish, is that a lot of times they're in the swimming pool in the 3-feet section. It's very safe. You're not going to drown. And what happens is when they get introduced to Torah concepts, it's kind of like they're going out to the 8-feet section. Right. Now you got to learn to swim a little bit. Like the Torah is a yam, right? It's like a sea within itself, right? And so what happens is they got to learn some training. But the problem is when it still comes in the New Testament, they're still in the 3-feet section. They haven't left. So it doesn't matter how much Torah concepts they learn. The problem is a lot of it's retro, taking this knowledge and trying to basically Judaize New Testament concepts that are out of context. So, this is very important because what do you do with the discrepancies between Matthew's gospel of the virgin birth narrative versus Luke's narrative? Right. Matthew, it's Joseph has a dream. With Luke, it's Miriam having an image of a visitation. Luke sets out in the beginning of his gospel, he says, listen, there was many accounts, and I've actually did this to disprove those accounts. So he's saying that he had a problem with these other accounts in circulation, And of course, the churches will say, well, Mark was earlier, but in Mark we don't read anything about the appearance of Yeshua to his disciples. There's a lot of things missing that were later added to the 15th to 16th chapter. And so the church fathers, and church scholars will say, well, okay, Mark was first, Matthew copied. But then you have an author, Professor Dilbert Flusser, when he was alive. He argued that Luke was possibly the earliest because it had more of a historical accurate context, even though there may have been some embellishments to later manuscripts, but the authenticity seems to be proven worthy. So when you look at all this, the problem is when you deal with the New Testament on its own turf, there's so many holes involved that if you were to deal with it, the house of cards come collapsing on your theology.
100%, I agree with you 100%. I would love to see you and Rabbi SHAPIRA, and I say that like I mentioned before, respect, calling him Rabbi SHAPIRA, although that's a Messianic title, but nevertheless it's one that's studied, because I know how the institutions or the institutes basically give them a degree of, okay, you arrived at this level of what they call doctrination or whatever you want to call it. But at least they arrived to a certain level. So in that sense, respectfully, I'll call him Rabbi because it means teacher. And I would love to see you and him have a deep conversation on these topics. I personally would love to see it because there's a lot of Messianics, a lot of people watching, a lot of people interested, because what I've seen, the many Messianics, they eventually leave the Messianic community seeking after to convert to Judaism or to return to Judaism. There's a lot of Jews in the church world, the Messianic world, leaving that world to embrace 100% Judaism. And I'm for that. I know Tovia Singer, you know Tovia Singer, and a lot of the things that Tovia Singer says I share with a lot of people, and I try to translate a lot of his works into Spanish, which he gave me permission when I met him in Long Beach. And I think the more people come to the realization of Torah truth, the more they're going to want to embrace Judaism. And then we have another problem. The problem where rabbis don't want to convert.
The politicization.
The politicization of conversion. Matter of fact, just today, we had an issue over a certain group of rabbis who are trying to control and make business out of Judaism in certain parts of the world. I won't go into that. But because someone built a mikveh, and the one rabbi was giving him the direction how to do so, and he said, well, I will help you as long as you don't use the mikveh for the purpose of conversion. And I said to him, do not negotiate with that rabbi on that point. If you do that, you will close the whole entire country up to be able to have conversion in that country. And now we have something blown up that I got to deal with it later. But the bottom line is that Judaism is growing, and people from the Messianic Christian world are coming out to embrace Judaism, and it's a reality that many rabbis don't want to face. And I'm excited. I don't know about you, but it's...
no, I think it is exciting. I've been privileged to travel around the world, and it's been an honor to meet a lot of people from non-Jewish backgrounds who are hungry. And, I believe in being transparent and also having some integrity with people, intellectual integrity, spiritual integrity, because you're dealing with people's souls here at the bottom line. And I'm sensitive to the fact, even though I could be judged, people could judge me and say, well, why bother with the whole New Testament thing and teaching these things? Why? Because I believe in dealing with the rectification of history. When you're able to clear a person's mind, this is another reason with the politicization of the conversion program. You don't know what's in the back of a person's head. Whether they believe in... I have a story. I have someone who converted Orthodox, I know. Lovely guy. But then he calls me up and he says, I've been struggling with fear because I think that because I denied my Christianity, I'm going to go to hell. Can you help me with this? So I've had to sit there and I had to talk to this individual, and I said, well, where was your sincerity of your thoughts? Did you know what you were doing when you did a conversion? In other words, were you aware conscientiously what you were getting into? And so the problem with that is that there was a lot of things that were left undone because they didn't have proper guidance. And I realized not every Jew has to deal with the New Testament. Those who have expertise in that area, that should be their job. You mentioned Tovia Singer, Rabbi Tovia Singer. So he dedicates his time for an anti-missionary movement, but also at the same time he's reaching out to many these non-Jews to help them, right? And regardless of Messianics who feel indifferent to what Rabbi Tovia Singer does, he's one of the individuals I could say, compared to the others out there, who's at least taking the time out to look at the history of the church fathers and what
Right.
this says and what this mentioned, that manuscript. And you can't deny that, because if you're dealing with a manuscript, you have to deal with, as they say, the proof was in the pudding.
Right.
You have to deal with it, and you cannot shun something away and just continue to believe what you want to believe in theologically, because you're dealing with a historical piece of text that has shaped your belief system. Those
Correct.
are important. So I believe that when we take the time out to reach these individuals, we're doing a big service to Hashem. It's a Kiddush Hashem in the sense that we're able to help bring these people out. Now, not everyone has to go to Judaism. That's fine. But at least someone can have a clarity, a peace of mind. I can tell you in the past, since I've been back in the United States, I've had 3 pastors contact me who have stated, I'm very confused about the belief in the Trinity. I've had to accept it in order to become a pastor, in order to be recognized by this denomination, but it doesn't make sense to me. Another one says, I don't believe that Jesus is God in the flesh. So you have these individuals for the majority of their life being pastors, and they question these theologies. And so they want to understand where their belief comes from. They need guidance. They recognize the validity of the Torah. And so they're trying to recognize things in context of history. So if we're not there to help them, then, what are we
here for?
Exactly.
We're supposed to be here light.
Yeah, or LeBron, right? The light to the nations. I believe it's relevant. And, listen, it's okay to have differences. That was the whole beauty between Halal and Shammai, right? We can have our differences and everything, but ultimately I believe it has to be for the goal. Because if we have individuals, my concern with the Messianic movement is this. You can have individuals come to the knowledge of Torah, and I believe it serves as a great gateway. Even though I know in the overall Jewish movement, they can look at that as a negative, right? Oh, it's a Avodah Zarah, it's that. I understand. But the problem is when you deal with these individuals, they don't know that's a Avodah Zarah. They don't know what that means. So you can't blame someone who was raised by his wolves to act as a wolf. You have to be able to reach them where they're at. And so in this sense, when you deal with these individuals, the idea of the tikkun process is to be able to reach them on their level, to go. And so, I found myself in many of these circles, because that's also been my upbringing in life, dealing with those who are more of the black sheep, those who are on the unorthodox side of life, to be able to reach them. And that's a big purpose. Now, the problem with the Messianic movement I have with that is, while it can serve as a gateway, it could be a gateway drug, that could be negative, right? Because it gets people hooked, but it can dwarf their spiritual growth. Because what happens when you think you enter into this, I have it all now, my spirituality is complete. But the problem is it's not complete. Eventually you hit a wall, and you plateau spiritually, right? There's no growth. Because what you believe you were taught about certain things in Jewish concepts is not 100% accurate. So this is why it's important to be able to challenge that status quo, and to be able to get people to expand outside of that, outside the box. Okay, question your Messianic leaders. Do it. We're invited to question, to play devil's advocate in Judaism, right?
Heck, I question the leaders of the Orthodox world.
Exactly.
With this whole mishigas of what's going on in the Hasidic world.
Right.
That they're making someone into a Mashiach,
Right.
which he hasn't even qualified yet on any level, and he's no longer with us, physically speaking. It's a repeat of first century Christianity, as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
And here is my question: where do we go? First of all, are you planning to open up a community in your area, and where's your community?
Yes, so currently I'm located on the Treasure Coast, which is directly above the Palm Beach, West Palm Beach. I'm in Martin County, stationed in the Jensen Beach Stewart area. So I currently was able to acquire a building up there that I met the owner of the property. So we just got done renovating. So we installed a bima, and so we're working on the rest of the renovations. And so we are going to have a community up there. Now there is a Reformed community there with very low community members. And then way out west is a Chabad out there. But he's way on the west side of the county. And mostly he's there to reach out with a lot of retiree Jews from New York.
Right, the reform that's out there.
Exactly. So we're there. We're more on the coastal line there, off of near the beach over there, Hudson Island almost. And so we're going to be opening up soon. We've just done some renovation, and the goal is to be able to help the region up there.
Right.
That's what the community is there for. So it's not Messianic, right? So it's definitely not. It's going to be more obviously traditional style, Jewish worship and expression. That's the goal.
Wonderful, wonderful. But whatever we can do here with the Ways of Israel, Los Caminos Israel in Spanish. You speak Spanish?
Se hablo poquito.
Un poquito español? Okay, very good. Maybe we can be able to hook up and be of help whatever I can. I know Asher will, but there was something I had to clear with you just to make sure. And I think there's no reason why not to help each other, because our whole idea is to create a independent new movement. Many Orthodox rabbis are not happy with what's going up in Israel with the control factors, the political factors, with conversions and returns. So. And I am working with other rabbis, not only Rabbi Meza, but also another rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Ovadia, very, very incredible man, and other Sephardic rabbis who have added to the movement. And we're all doing this out of our own will. No one's telling us, okay, we're going to do this. But just to let you know, we have over 40 communities already inscribed and growing throughout the United States and Latin America. So that any conversions that we're doing will be recognized within everyone that's affiliated or connected, interconnected. So hopefully we could work together on that as well.
Yes.
That way, if you need any help over there,
100%. Yes,
We're very supportive.
We're dealing with special souls right now. You know, I've been, as I told Rabbi Meza, what I've been doing. I have my classes I do, and these individuals need help, right? They need help. Because obviously, I don't recognize myself as an expert in everything. I always believe in humbly, being able to point people in the right direction to other rabbis who are able to help facilitate to meet the needs of those individuals. Whether it's like undergoing a gihur, I think that's very important as well, to go to the proper corridors, the proper protocol, and make sure it's done properly to bring honor to Hashem. So I do believe it's very much needed that we can all work together on the same page.
Oh man, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And I think we're about to do some weddings here right now. So,
Okay.
Yeshikoach, nice to meet you.
Okay.